Welcome, guys. Welcome all to another week, the third week actually of this 20-week series, in which that I'm helping you to prove your impact, to put your organization in the best position possible to receive funding. And I actually want to, very similar to last week, I want to share even more good news. So the good news that I shared last week was the potential to have a blog posted on the blog of Harvard's International Development School, and it actually got posted. And so I'll just share what that actually looks like. And I'm super excited that it's actually placed there. And what I will do is I will provide the link on this chat and also be posting on social media and other accounts of that nature. But I am super excited that it actually got posted. They are super, super helpful, and they are very detailed and very good at what they do. And so I am continually learning from them, but I am super grateful just to have a post within their blog. So that's a little bit of good news that I want to share. But let's review from last week. So last week we talked about this idea of teleos, intended destination. Yes, it's a Greek word. I'm not talking about what your organization does and not about why, thank you, Harry, why your organization is existing, but talking about where you are headed. And so this week we're going to be talking about understanding and documenting your why. Understanding and documenting your why. And going back to this metaphor or analogy of a relationship, this has everything to do, again, with a relationship. In any relationship, you don't want to have a surface level type of a relational experience with someone. But at least I hope you don't. I've grown past having surface level type of relationships. And what I really do desire is a relationship that has depth. A relationship that has width, a relationship that is very long or wide or deep, all those different synonyms. A relationship that has depth. And I think the same principle can be applied to that of donors. You don't want just a surface level type of relationship. You want a relationship that has depth, but we all start somewhere. And so what we're going to be doing is going through these different levels of different relationships that you can have with a donor and maybe what it looks like, and then figuring out what level you are at, but then figuring out what level you can be at. And so going through the surface level, the middle ground level, and the core level. And the core principle of a relationship, as you guys probably already know, is that of trust. It's about building trust. But I think that the thing about trust, at least for me, is trust isn't given. It's something that's earned. Trust isn't given, it's something that's earned, at least for me. And I think the same principle applies to funding. Funding isn't given, it's earned. Funding isn't given, it's earned. And so we need to approach, as organizations, we need to approach that relationship with the donor just like that. In the same way someone has to develop, we have to develop trust in someone else. Well, then why should it be any different with the relationship with the donor? And so this is all about developing true trust in the eyes of the donor as we build depth in this relationship. So the graphic that I'm actually going to show you for today is the one that's going to be on your screen right now. And when you see this graphic, I want you to think about just building depth. And so the surface level is communicating. The middle ground level in this relationship is understanding, and the ground or the core level is documenting. And so if you have to save this, whatever, I will be sure to send it out by email after as well for those that are watching through the live stream. But this graphic has everything to do, again, with building depth in a relationship with the donor. So let's start with the service level. So service level is communication or communicating. What are you communicating? Well, I think the first thing that you're communicating what problems are being addressed in the community by your organization. And when I say what problems your organization is addressing in the community, when I say addressing, what I mean is what problems does your organization already have solutions for? And I place an emphasis on already. Because a lot of times as organizations, we can think about solutions that we're going to have in the future, maybe in the near future. But what we need to focus on is are the solutions that we already have now. And so when I'm talking about what problems are you addressing, what problems do you already have solutions for right now? I think to share some experience with this and going through one of the organizations that I was speaking to in doing this very this week or topic, I was speaking to Hope for Kids, and they were talking about different problems that they addressed. But one thing that came up was this idea of, I sort of tackle that problem. I can see us getting there and tackling that problem. I think we do that. And those key phrases or catchphrases, if you will, that really showed that they felt as if, or the organization felt as if they were addressing every problem in the community, when in fact they weren't. And that's why I make a clear distinction between whether you're directly or indirectly addressing a problem, whether you're directly or indirectly. Directly means that you very much so know that your solution is tailored to that specific problem. Indirect is maybe you so happen to hit that problem or tackle that problem or address that problem at some point, but it's not the intention of it. And so you want to look at problems that you have an intention to address, an intention to already provide a solution for. That's what I mean by directly address and indirectly address. And what happens is this sets the expectation not only for your organization, but it sets the expectation for your donors as well. If you set the expectation that you're going to address every problem in that community, that's the expectation that the donor is going to expect of you. But what if your programs and organization isn't built to the capacity to actually do that quite yet? Well, then the donor is not going to have their expectations met, which then takes away from the longevity of that relationship and takes away from the longevity of you being funded as an organization. The most simple way to do this is very much so to state what problems you directly address, which sets these direct expectations, which leads to you being able to actually meet the expectations that the donor has for you. A lot of this comes back to communicating. And so we need to communicate as organizations. We need to communicate the direct problems we address, the direct problems that we provide solutions for rather than the indirect ones. I think in addition to that, in terms of communicating, I think a question that really comes up sometimes in speaking to a donor: what's the big deal? When I say that, I mean, what's the big deal in the problem that you're addressing? Why is that problem such a big deal? And maybe that seems like such an obvious question or statement, but it is a question that does need to be answered. And maybe it's like, of course, poverty or of course, drug addiction is a huge problem. But for a donor, they want to hear that from you. Why is this such a big deal for your organization? And so we need to be able to communicate that very clearly of why it is such a big deal to the organization. And what this does is it helps you to have donor buy-in. It helps you to reel in the donor so that they really do build that trust in your organization that you will actually follow through with addressing the problem that you said you're going to address. Let's go to the next level. So middle ground level, understanding. Understanding, it focuses on how do you know? And when I say how do you know, I mean, how do you know that your solutions actually address the problems? And so let me say it again. How do you know your solutions actually address the problems that you say are in the community? And sometimes we can just be like, of course they do. Take my word for it. But again, this is a relationship where you're building trust. We're not at that place of you can just take my word for it. We need a little bit more. And so when I say, how do you know? I think what I really mean is, how do you know your solution works? Rather than you just telling me, I want you to show me a little bit more. How do you know your solution works. I think a question that you can start with to help you in figuring this out is, what would you see in the community served if these problems were being 100% addressed? What would you see in your community if these problems were being 100% addressed? And I place an emphasis on 100% because you want to figure out what it looks like for these problems to be fully addressed. This end state, this goal type of vision, you want to figure out what that community will really look like. For example, going back to Hope for Kids, and really the One Day at a Time organization as well in Philadelphia, their youth programming. Currently, right now, there is a school to prison pipeline that's very much so in the Philadelphia area, specifically in North Philadelphia. And so their in-state, they're 100% addressing this is when students are no longer tardy. Students are no longer skipping class. A certain percentage of students are no longer skipping class, or a certain percentage of students are no longer being tardied, or a certain percentage are no longer being expelled, male or female. This is all attributed to their vision of what it looks like for this problem to be 100% addressed. But also looking at the graduation rate as well. Looking at from the graduation rate to that of going to the attendance of college rate, and then graduation of college rate. These are examples of what it looks like in that end state when it's this problem for them is being 100% addressed. But here's the next step of that. What we need to do as an organization is put two pictures on the wall. We need to put that one picture of what it looks like for that problem to be 100% addressed. And we need to pair it or compare it to the picture that we see currently in that community, the picture that we currently see in this community. And from that, we need to see if they are the same. The goal is to make those pictures be equivalent. The goal is to make sure those pictures are similar, actually synonymous. That's the goal. But we have to really be realistic with ourselves as an organization. We need to figure out where we are actually at. We need to figure out where we actually see ourselves in comparison to that future picture. And I think the one thing that you'll find is as you see yourself in the way that you actually are, well, that's the way that the organization or the donor is going to see you. But if you try to convince the donor to see you as something in which that you don't even see yourself, well, then that's going to be a hard thing to persuade them of because you don't even see yourself in that place that you want to be. I think we have to consider that we aren't funded for what we could do. We're funded for what we are doing. We aren't funded for what we could do. We're funded for what we are doing. And yes, there are some times where that statement is very loose, and sometimes that a donor will look at the potential of your organization, but realistically, they're going to also, and more than anything, look at what you're already doing. Funding comes based off what you're already doing. And so we need to figure out what as an organization you already doing. Going back to the example for Hope for Kids, looking at this school to prison pipeline, they didn't see this picture of having this certain percentage of students that were graduating or not being targeted or not skipping class. What they saw was probably over 50% of students that were actually skipping class or being tardy or not logging into the Zoom because everything is virtual at this moment, or X amount of students that were being expelled. That's the current condition. And so on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe this picture is a 10, what the future could look like, but they're really at a 3. We need to be realistic with ourselves because that is the realistic answer of how much funding we'll probably get based off where we are. But the neat thing is that we can grow from that 3 to that 10, but it starts with us being realistic with ourselves. We aren't funded for what we could do, but we are funded for what we are doing. Awesome. Let's go to the core level, the bottom level, the ground level. The ground level is this idea of a need for statistics. It's the idea for a need for numbers. I love the power of stories. Stories really do have a power. Stories put an image in someone's mind, and images are things that people normally don't forget. We normally, just going based off of how we think, we normally remember more about an image than about words. And so stories really do paint a vivid image in our minds. Where am I going with this? Well, I'm going with we present different stories as organizations to donors. We can tell our own story. The people that are benefiting from our organization, they have a story. But I think the story that we do a lot of times miss is the story that's provided from our numbers, the story that's provided from our statistics. I think that the best stories are those that you don't have to tell. The best stories are those that you don't have to tell. The best stories are those that people tell it for you, or no one has to say anything at all, and someone just knows by looking at a graphic, a graph, a table, or some type of numeric that tells a story. And it's amazing when all these three stories line up. And I call that the power of compatibility. The power of compatibility is when, again, all these three stories, the story that you paint for your organization, the stories that other people paint for your organization, and the story that your numbers say about your organization. When those three line up, well, then that builds a level of trust that is so deep with a donor, because they're not only hearing from you, they're hearing from the people that are benefiting. And more than that, they're hearing from your numbers, your statistics, the very thing that you don't even have to say, but you can simply prove and you can show. But what happens is when something is off in one of these stories, and I'm not going to talk about which one is more important. The point is that you want all three stories to line up. You want all three stories to be similar. But when one of these stories is off, well, then it takes away from the depth of this relationship with the donor, because it takes away from your credibility. You want to have you want to have consistency, not inconsistency. You want to have consistency. You want to have consistency in these three stories. Again, the story that you paint for yourself, the stories that other people paint for you, and the story that or stories that your numbers or statistics paint for you. I want to leave you with this quote. Inconsistency leads to lack of trust, and lack of trust leads to lack of funding. Inconsistency leads to lack of trust, and lack of trust leads to lack of funding. Thank you for coming today. Thank you so much for tuning in. This week again was understanding and documenting your why, focusing on building the depth in this relationship, building trust. And please, if you ever need help, please just reach out and schedule a one-on-one consultation that is free. But I am now open for any questions that you guys might have at this time.
Jameson, you said the three things that you need to have all together is statistics, and what's the other two?
The first one is communicating. So communicating what problems that you provide solutions for.
Uh-huh.
And then the second one is understanding, which is how do you know that your solutions work?
Okay. Communicating. Okay, circle this. Understanding. And then the statistics.
Yes, ma'am.
And all three together need to be consistent to tell your story.
Yes, exactly.
Got it. Thank you.
Awesome. No problem. No problem. Great question. All about building this story and building this relationship. Awesome. Awesome, guys. Well, thank you again for tuning in. And I will be sure to send this by email for the recording and any additional material, and sending you guys the blog post. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week.
All right. Have a good evening. Good day.
You too.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye, guys.